Hello, Psych 101 students. Welcome to Module 6, Chapter 13, Learning Objective 8. How can you understand personality? So remember that personality refers to our relatively enduring and stable predispositions and traits that influence our behavior across many situations. That is, it refers to people's typical ways of thinking, feeling, and behaving. We will look at 4 approaches to personality that are summarized in this table on page 575 or 515, sorry, of the textbook. The psychodynamic theory, humanistic approaches, social cognitive approaches, and trait approaches. And you can see that we'll be looking at 2 major approaches in the social cognitive category as well as the trait approach. So there's a total of 6 major approaches in this learning objective. Let's start with Freud. So Sigmund Freud, he was a Viennese neurologist he developed the first comprehensive theory of personality known as the psychodynamic theory of personality. The focus of his theory is basically on unconscious motivation for behavior. This is probably one of his most significant contributions, the idea of the unconscious mind, that we have things buried in our mind, memories buried in our mind that we can't really consciously reflect upon, but they still affect our behavior. Things that you've completely forgotten about, but they're still buried in your mind, and they still have an impact. According to some authors, Freud's conception of personality is analogous to an iceberg, as shown in the picture here, with the conscious mind being the tip, barely visible above the surface, and the unconscious being the vast submerged area entirely underwater. The conscious level of our mental activity consists of the thoughts that we are aware of. The preconscious level consists of content that is not currently in our awareness, but it could be brought into our awareness. So the preconscious is kind of like things are stored in our memory that are accessible in long-term memory. If we had the right kind of cues, we could recall those particular memories. They're not in our awareness right now, but they're accessible still. The unconscious level contains material that the mind cannot easily retrieve. Freud thought that the psyche consisted of 3 components. The id is the component of personality that is completely submerged in the unconscious and operates according to the pleasure principle. Freud called the force that drives the pleasure principle the libido. Today, that term has a specifically sexual connotation, but in his time, he didn't only mean it sexually, but just basic urges, that come from deep within. They may be sexual in nature or they may be aggressive in nature. The superego is the component of the personality that reflects the internalization of societal and parental standards of conduct. It is a rigid structure of morality or conscience. So it's basically your conscience, right versus wrong. The ego is the component of personality that tries to satisfy the wishes of the id while being responsive to the superego. The ego operates according to the reality principle, which involves rational thought and problem solving. So the reality principle is that, I need to do things in life that are good for me and that takes into account right versus wrong and takes into account each situation. And I can't always do stuff that I want, which is what the id wants. I also have to, pay attention to the superego, which is my conscience, knowing which behaviors are good versus bad. We can kind of portray the three components of the personality in this picture here. So the id is portrayed as a demon here, and it operates in the unconscious level and consists of your basic animalistic urges, mainly sexual and aggressive impulses. I mean, the id, if it had a motto, it would be, if it feels good, then do it. I mean, the id wants to have sex. It wants to, if somebody makes you angry, it wants to fight them. If the id sees a delicious cake, it wants to eat it. The id doesn't care about whether it's a right or wrong behavior. It's just the urges that come from within you. Like if you're attracted to somebody, it's like an internal urge that comes up. When you get a flash of anger, it's an internal urge that comes up. That this person's angered me. When you see that delicious cake and you want to eat it, it's kind of an internal urge. And this is what the id is all about. The superego, portrayed over on the right side as an angel here, is your sense of morality. So it's like your conscience. It tells you which behaviors are acceptable or not in your society and your culture. The ego is your principal decision maker. It operates according to the reality principle. It's kind of like your consciousness. It's your decision maker. It's a part of your mind that's active and thinking, what should I do now, or what should I eat that cake or not? Should I this person may be angry. Should I fight them or not? And so the ego is in between the id and the superego. It wants to satisfy the urges of the id. I mean, we all want to do things that bring us pleasure and avoid pain, but we also have this other part of our mind that tells us whether those behaviors are good or bad and appropriate or not. Yeah. Conflicts between the id and the superego lead to anxiety. The id wants to party. Okay, it's maybe that's a simplistic way to put it, but imagine you have a test tomorrow, but there's this great party tonight, and there's somebody there that you're attracted to, you just love to go to this party. Like, you can feel it from within that you want to go to this party and socialize and maybe get to talk to that person you're attracted from. So you can feel that urge coming from within you. That's the id. The superego is telling you, you better study for tomorrow's test. If you fail, your mother and father are going to be very angry, and it's going to affect your future. And it's telling you, what the right versus wrong decision is. And so the ego has to deal with this conflict, and it experiences distress because it's trying to satisfy both components. You really want to go party, but you're supposed to study. So one way the mind protects itself from the distress of this conflict is by using unconscious mental strategies called defense mechanisms. Oh, there it is. Okay. So this is a list of defense mechanisms. Um, It shows 7 of them here. I want you to read this over on your own. Get familiar with each of these 7 defense mechanisms. They have good examples listed. This chart's on page 517 in your textbook. So take a look at them, and you can probably identify with a number of these, happening at different points in your life. Okay. Psychodynamic theory today. Contemporary neo-Freudians focus on social interactions. Neo just means new, so these are the new Freudians. And Freud was kind of preoccupied a little bit with sexual and aggressive impulses mainly, but the new Freudians focus just on more basic social interactions and relationships. Object relations theory is centered on our internal relationships with others. According to this theory, our lifelong relationship skills are strongly rooted in our early attachments with our parents and especially our mothers. Because Freud's central premises cannot be examined through accepted scientific methods, psychologists have largely abandoned psychodynamic theories. And what that means is that there's no way to prove or disprove the idea of an id or an ego or a superego. And so when something can't be, scientifically demonstrated or proven, then it's not really a worthwhile theory. What I would like to point out once again, though, is that Freud had really 2 strong, lasting contributions. He was one of the first theorists to really understand the unconscious mind and that it has an impact on us, and no one doubts that anymore. We have a part of our brain that affects our behavior that we're not really aware of. And the second lasting contribution was he believed that much of what ends up in our unconscious mind comes from our childhood. And he always stressed the importance of our childhood in determining our later personalities and behavior. And we also know that to be true now as well. Okay, so that's psychodynamic theory. Humanistic approaches embrace free will and propose that self-actualization, the fulfillment of human potential, is the core motive in personality. So self-actualization is like being the best that you can be. It's maximizing your potential in life. And they believe that this was a driving force in humans. According to Carl Rogers, one of the great humanistic psychologists, person-centered theory, according to his person-centered approach, personality is influenced by how you understand yourself and how others evaluate you. Research has provided support for Rogers' theory. Continuing with Rogers' person-centered approach, personality is shaped by the evaluations of others, which can lead to conditions of worth, what he called conditions of worth. These are expectations that we place upon ourselves. We often learn while growing up that we have to be a certain way in order to be worthy of love. It's kind of like you learn that there are certain hoops you have to jump through, and your mother or your father or both, will love you when you are a certain way, when you jump through those hoops. I'll give you an example from my life. I mean, and it really affected much of my life. I learned during childhood and adolescence that when I won things, whether it was sports or playing chess, which was a big part of my adolescence, or getting A's in school, or getting a certain degree, like when I was at the top, my mother would gush with love and admiration and would be so proud of me. But I found out at times if I got the second place in something, I would often get yelled at, and I realized that in order to get her love, I had to be the best at whatever I did, and this had dramatic impact on my life. It meant that I could never appreciate my achievements if they weren't the best. So, for instance, just I don't want to go too far into it, but for much of my adult life, although I had a master's in psychology, I was embarrassed by it because I went into a PhD program, but I fell a little bit short. I ended up getting married and leaving the program, but I was embarrassed for most of my life because I only had a master's in psychology and not a PhD. And and this all came from my childhood and my adolescence and growing up realizing that if I came second, if I didn't have the best, that I wasn't worthy of love. And I've sorted a lot of that out during my life through therapy and other means, but it this is a profound, I really do believe in Carl Rogers' ideas around this, and the fact that a lot of us learn that we have to do certain things or be a certain way to feel worthy of receiving praise and love from others. Um, However, if a child is raised with unconditional positive regard, which is basically unconditional love, then the child's personality can develop freely without conditions of worth. And this is one of the has been one of the driving forces of my parenting with my daughter, and to provide unconditional positive love, throughout her life, and so that she never feels like that she has to meet expectations or anything like that. And this is why every day that she's that I put her to bed, and I tell her I love her every night, and sometimes many times during each day, and it's a to it's to prevent them from feeling like they have to be a certain way to gain your love, and then they can develop more naturally. And my daughter is 17 now and is very mentally healthy and is brilliant, um and is just a wonderful person. And I think if anyone asked me, I would say that's the number one thing to do when parenting, is to, no matter what the circumstances, always provide unconditional love to your child, even when they screw up. I mean, you still love them, and you let them know it, and you work with them to improve whatever they need to, but you never stop loving them. You never pull that love away, and so that they realize that they can always count on you, and that they can always come to you. Okay, I'm going off on tangent here, so let's continue. Okay, so that was humanistic approaches and Carl Rogers' person-centered theory. The third kind of major category is social cognitive approaches. And social cognitive approaches to personality have to do with thinking. Uh, we'll look at one here. According to Rogers' expectancy theory, our behaviors are part of our personality. And our behaviors result from how we think about two things: our expectancies for reinforcement and the values we ascribe to particular reinforcers. So we end up engaging in behaviors that we expect to bring reinforcement of particular reinforcers that we value. And I can get this. You're constantly driven to do behaviors in your life that will bring reinforces means something to you, reinforces that you value. Rotter also proposed that personalities are based on locus of control. Locus of control refers to people's perception of whether or not they control the rewards and punishments they experience. An internal locus of control is a belief that one can control one's own life. An external locus of control is a belief that life is controlled by outside forces, which a person cannot influence, or that chance or fate controls their lives. And you will find people, with one or the other, believing that they can constantly direct their lives and make things happen, or believing that, sometimes it's just luck or chance that determines whether you do well or not. Try this out. It's a locus of control questionnaire in your book on page 521, and you can see if you have an internal or external locus of control. According to another social cognitive approach to personality, it's Bandura's reciprocal determinism. There are three factors that interact with each other to influence personality: the person's environment. Then we have what's called person factors, which include the person's characteristics, their self-confidence, and their expectations. And we have actual behavior itself. Because personality is explained by the interaction of all three of these factors, the model is called reciprocal determinism. So the determinism part of that comes from, these are the three factors that determine your personality. Reciprocal means, back and forth, that in both directions, that your environment influences your behavior just as much as your behavior influences your environment. So imagine you're at this party here in this picture. You can imagine that your behavior is going to be influenced by what's going on around you at this party. If everyone's laughing as they are in this picture, then you might feel happy too. But understand also that your behavior is going to affect the environment. Let's say all of a sudden I bring up a really important personal topic. I mean, a lot of this laughter is going to disappear. I'm going to affect the environment around me by my behavior. And there are similar examples, to connect each of these three factors. Environment and behavior affect each other. The environment and your personal characteristics affect each other, and your personal characteristics affect your behavior, and your behavior can affect those. And so this is basically Bandura's reciprocal determinism theory of personality, that these three factors constantly interact and affect each other to determine your personality. Trait approaches are primarily interested in describing and understanding the structure of personality. What are the components that make up personality? So trait approaches are ways of studying personality that are based on people's characteristics, their tendencies to act in a certain way over time and across most situations. Personality traits can be viewed on a continuum, as in this example here shown on the screen. For example, in terms of shyness, people range from extremely shy to extremely outgoing. Most people tend to be in the middle, have an average amount of shyness. Relatively few people are in the extremes of any personality trait. So this is typical of any trait we look at. There will be a bunch of people that are kind of in the middle of that trait, and then there'll be a small number of people that are extreme on one end or the other. as in this example. Some people are extremely shy, some people are extremely outgoing. Oops. Eysenck, developed the biological trait theory. He initially proposed that personality traits had two major dimensions. The first one is how outgoing people are, and this is the introversion extroversion dimension. Introversion refers to how shy, reserved, and quiet a person is. Extroversion refers to how sociable, outgoing, and bold a person is. The second dimension was whether their emotions tended to be stable or unstable. We sometimes call this neuroticism now. Later, he also proposed a third dimension of personality traits, psychoticism, which reflects a mixture of aggression, poor impulse control, self-centeredness, and or a lack of empathy. We now refer to this as constraint. We can see a pictorial representation of this model here. You can see the three dimensions, extroversion, introversion across the center, unstable versus stable, going up and down, and then the third dimension, psychoticism or constraint, going on the diagonal there. Each of these aspects of personality, the extroversion, introversion, the neuroticism, stable versus unstable, and the psychoticism or constraint, can be traced back to a different biological cause. And this is why it's known as a biological trait theory. Each of these three major dimensions has a particular biological cause. Okay, the second trait theory that we're going to look at is the five-factor theory, and this emerged to describe the essential traits that serve as the building blocks of personality. There is considerable evidence that supports the five-factor theory. In effect, this theory won out over many others. There were a lot of trait theories proposed. We just looked at Eysenck's trait theory. There is other theories that had, 7 traits in them. There was a theory that had 11 traits in it. Eysenck's had 3 major traits, and I mean, but throughout hundreds of research studies, this is the model that really won out and fit the majority of the evidence, and it's the one that survived and is used today. The big 5 personality traits emerge across cultures. So you can look at different cultures around the world and find the same 5 personality traits among people, and also among adults and children. So it's not restricted to any particular age. And even when vastly different questionnaires are used to assess the factors, so it's not just one test that's being used. There have been many different tests of personality traits, and this one kept showing up as the one that to best fit the data, that there are 5 factors. Let's take a look at them. Okay, I don't know why they did it like this, but I'm gonna zoom in so we can actually see the 5 factors here. Come on, move up. Okay, here we go. And these are the 5 factors. You can see that if you look at the first letters, they spell the word ocean, going down from top to bottom. If you put them in a different order, they could spell canoe if you like that better, but this is the typical memory aid that's used. They spell the word ocean. Each trait is a continuum. So you can be high on that trait, you can be low, you can be somewhere in the middle. So, for instance, the middle one is extroversion. You can be very extroverted, you can be very introverted, you can just be kind of average in the middle though. So each one you can imagine as, like this large scale where you have a rating somewhere on the scale, between extroversion and introversion, for instance. Um, I'm just going to talk about, like, if you were high on each of these scales. I'll kind of give you just a quick glimpse of what you would be like. So if you were high on the openness to experience scale, it would mean that you're creative, you're intellectually curious, and you have unconventional interests and outlooks on the world. If you're high on the conscientious scale, or trait, I should say, actually, it's a trait, it means that you'd be very careful and responsible. You'd be somebody that would show up on time to things. You would, have good habits of eating and exercise and brushing your teeth and etc. If you're high on the extroverted scale, you'd be social and lively and outgoing. If you're higher on the agreeableness scale, it means that you're sociable and easy to get along with. You're somebody that would probably be polite, you'd be forgiving, you'd have good manners, you'd be helpful to others. And if you're high on the neuroticism scale, it means that you tend to be tense and moody a lot of the time, as well as anxious. It's the one it's kind of negative to be high on that scale compared to the other ones. Um, okay, these five traits, what's known as the Big Five, they predict many important real world behaviors. For example, um, people that are high in conscientiousness tend to have better physical health and they tend to live longer. Uh, as far as something like job performance and grades in school, the pattern of high in conscientiousness, high in agreeableness, and low in neuroticism is, helps to is very predictive of who does well in jobs and in school. So, and there's been a number of studies that have pointed out, different mixes of these five traits and what we can expect from that type of person. As I said, this is a model that's turned out to be a clear winner among many theories, and it's been around for decades now. And there's a ton of research that supports that these are kind of the five basic personality traits that people have. Uh, so, do personalities matter in roommate relationships? Uh, Carly and colleagues in 1991 found that roommates with similar personalities have better relationships, and they often plan to live together the next year. In other research, Ogletree and colleagues found that a third of the college-age people in their study reported experiencing roommate conflict related to the cleanliness of their living space. This was a scale used in the Ogletree study, excuse me, and you can take a look at the questions you're on your own, and try it out if you want. But what they found was that having similar levels of cleanliness is one factor that determines if roommates will get along or not. And that will conclude learning objective 8.